The ritual of waiting. The autumn wind carried wood smoke across Michael Hartwell's fence as Roberta Ellison's wagon appeared on the road. Same hour, same day, 104 weeks without fail. Michael stood on the porch, coffee cooling in his hands, watching his children run toward the approaching wagon. Emma's braids flew behind her. Thomas waved both arms like he was signaling a ship to shore. Their joy was genuine, pure, in a way Michael had forgotten how to feel. 2 years since Sarah passed. 2 years of Roberta appearing every Wednesday with supplies, with help, with a warmth that filled the cabin for a few hours before leaving it emptier than before. Aunt Roberta. Emma's voice rang across the yard. The wagon stopped. Roberta climbed down, her movements graceful despite the long ride from town. She wore a brown dress, practical and plain, her dark hair pinned beneath a simple bonnet. Nothing about her demanded attention. Everything about her commanded respect. She knelt to embrace the children, and Michael saw what he always saw: a woman who gave without asking, who served without complaint, who had somehow become essential to his family's survival without him ever acknowledging it. Mr. Hartwell. She nodded as she approached the porch, children clinging to her skirts. Miss Ellison. He stepped aside to let her pass. Inside. She set to work immediately. Bread she'd baked that morning. Preserves from summer's harvest. A new primer for Thomas. A ribbon for Emma's hair. Small gifts. Always. Never presumptuous. Never more than a friend would bring. Michael watched from the doorway as she tidied the kitchen, as she listened to Emma's chatter about the barn cat's kittens, as she reviewed Thomas's sums with patient attention. She moved through his home like she belonged there, yet always with the careful distance of a guest. The fence along the north pasture needs mending, she said, not looking at him. I noticed the posts leaning on my way in. I'll see to it. And Emma's cough, has it improved? Some. I brought honey and herbs. A tea before bed should help. He nodded. She expected nothing more. This was their language: practical, surface, safe. When dusk came, Roberta gathered her things. The children protested as they always did. She promised to return next week as she always did. Michael walked her to the wagon as he always did. Thank you, he said, for everything. It's nothing. She climbed onto the seat, took the reins. Sarah would have wanted... She stopped, looked away. Good evening, Mr. Hartwell. He watched her wagon disappear down the road, swallowed by the gathering dark. Then he turned back to the cabin, to the children, to the evening routine that had become his entire existence. Later, after the children slept, Michael stood at the window where Sarah used to wait for him. He didn't know why he stood there. He didn't know what he was waiting for. The lamp burned low. The night pressed close, somewhere beyond the glass. Roberta rode alone toward a town that held nothing for her but an empty room. Michael turned away. He had survived 2 years by refusing to think too deeply, to feel too much. It was the only way he knew to keep going. But tonight, for reasons he couldn't name, the silence felt heavier than before. The question that changed everything. 3 days before Thanksgiving, the question came. They sat at supper, Michael at the head of the table, Emma and Thomas on either side. Venison stew, biscuits, the last of the apple butter, a meal like any other. Emma pushed a potato around her plate, her small face thoughtful. She had Sarah's eyes, that particular shade of gray-blue that could look right through a person. Papa, yes, sweetheart. Why doesn't Aunt Roberta eat with us on holidays? Michael's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. Doesn't she have a family? Emma continued. Everyone has family for Thanksgiving. Thomas set down his fork. At 10. He carried a quietness that reminded Michael too much of himself. She's always alone when she leaves here. Pa, I watch her wagon go. And there's never anyone waiting. The question hung in the air, simple, innocent, devastating. Michael realized he had no answer. In 2 years of weekly visits, he had never asked about Roberta's life beyond her service to his family. He knew she lived at Mrs. Crawford's boarding house in town. He knew she did sewing and mending for income. He knew she had been Sarah's closest friend since childhood. But he didn't know if she had other friends, other family, anyone at all who cared whether she lived or died. I suppose, Michael said slowly, she spends holidays quietly. Some folks prefer it that way. Emma's eyes narrowed a look of doubt he recognized from her mother. That's sad. Papa, nobody should be alone on Thanksgiving. No, he agreed. Nobody should. The conversation moved on to other things, Thomas's hope for snow, Emma's prayer for pie, but the question stayed lodged in Michael's chest like a splinter. That night, after stories and prayers and tucked blankets, Michael sat alone by the fire. The children's words circled his mind. She's always alone when she leaves here. When had he last thought about what happened after Roberta's wagon disappeared? When had he last considered that her life continued beyond the boundaries of his property, his needs, his grief? He closed his eyes and tried to remember Sarah's final morning, her hand in his, thin and cold, her voice barely above a whisper, the words she'd spoken urgent, important, meant to guide him through the darkness ahead. But the memory blurred at the edges. The harder he reached for her exact words, the more they slipped away like water through fingers. Let Roberta, she had said. Something about Roberta. Let Roberta. What? Michael opened his eyes. The fire had burned low. The cabin creaked in the wind. He needed to remember. Something told him everything depended on it. Words spoken to the wind. Morning frost covered the grass as Michael walked to Sarah's grave. The marker stood behind the barn, beneath the oak tree where they had carved their initials 15 years ago. He had chosen this spot so she could watch the children play, watch the seasons change, watch him grow old in the life they had built together. He hadn't spoken to her since the burial. Sarah. His voice came rough, unused to this kind of speech. I don't know if you can hear me. I hope you can. The wind stirred the bare branches above. A crow called in the distance. The children are growing. Emma has your stubbornness. Thomas has your quiet strength. He paused. They asked about Roberta yesterday. Asked why she's always alone. He knelt, brushed leaves from the stone. I've been getting by. Sarah, just getting by. I wake up, I work, I feed the children, I sleep, I do it again. 2 years of the same day, over and over. His voice cracked. I don't know how to do anything else. The wind offered no answers. He hadn't expected any. What am I supposed to do? You always knew you always had a plan, a purpose. I'm just lost. He stayed there a long while, the cold seeping through his knees. When he finally rose to leave, a memory surfaced sharp and sudden. The night before Sarah died, Michael had stepped out for air, overwhelmed by the smell of sickness, the weight of waiting. When he returned, Sarah and Roberta were alone. Roberta held Sarah's hands, both women crying. They spoke in low voices, urgent and tender. He had lingered in the doorway, not wanting to intrude. He never heard what they said, but he remembered how they looked at each other like women sealing a covenant, like sisters making promises that would outlast death. Michael walked back toward the cabin, his mind turning. Roberta had appeared 3 days after the funeral. She had come every week since. She had never explained why, had never needed to, but someone had asked her to come. Someone had extracted a promise. Sarah. The realization settled into his bones with a weight that felt almost like hope. Michael stopped at the edge of the yard, looking toward town. Somewhere there, Roberta was preparing for another holiday alone. Another Thanksgiving with an empty chair, an empty table, an empty life. Not this year. Thank you. he whispered to Sarah, to the wind, to whatever grace had finally opened his eyes. I think I understand now. He went inside to tell the children they would be having a guest for Thanksgiving. The room she called home. Michael had never been to Mrs. Crawford's boarding house. He rode into town the next morning, rehearsing simple words in his mind. Would you join us for Thanksgiving? The children would love it. I would appreciate the company. The boarding house stood at the end of Main Street, a 2-story clapboard building with a wraparound porch and lace curtains in every window. Respectable, modest, the kind of place where single women and traveling salesmen found temporary shelter. Mrs. Crawford answered his knock, her eyes widening with recognition and curiosity. Mr. Hartwell. This is unexpected. I'm looking for Miss Ellison. Is she in room 4, top of the stairs? But I should warn you. He was already climbing before she could finish. The hallway smelled of lavender and wood polish. 4 doors, evenly spaced. He stopped at the last one, removed his hat, and knocked. The door opened. Roberta stood there in a simple gray dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, without the bonnet, without the careful composure she wore at his cabin. She looked younger, more vulnerable. Mr. Hartwell. Confusion flickered across her face. Is something wrong? The children. The children are fine. I came to... May I come in? She hesitated, then stepped aside. The room was smaller than he'd expected. A narrow bed, neatly made, a washstand with a chipped basin, a single chair by the window. 1 plate, 1 cup, 1 set of utensils arranged on a tiny table. On the wall, in a simple frame, pressed flowers from Sarah's garden. Lavender and rose petals, preserved with care. The colors faded but still beautiful. Michael's chest tightened. You kept them, he said. Roberta followed his gaze. Sarah gave them to me the summer before she got sick. Said her garden was too full and I should have some of the beauty. The room told a story Michael had never bothered to read. This was Roberta's entire life, 4 walls, borrowed furniture, and pressed flowers from a dead woman's garden. Miss Ellison. He turned to face her. Roberta. The children asked me something the other day, and I couldn't answer. They asked why you don't share holidays with us. Her expression flickered surprise. Then something guarded. I didn't want to impose. You have your family, your traditions. We have an empty chair, he said. We have a table that feels wrong. No matter how much food we put on it, we have 2 children who love you and a father who... He stopped, unsure how to finish. Who what? Who should have asked you a long time ago? He gripped his hat in both hands. Will you join us for Thanksgiving, Roberta, please? For a long moment, she didn't answer. Her eyes glistened. Sarah used to say you were terrible at asking for help. A small smile crossed her lips. She wasn't wrong. Is that a yes? Yes, Michael. The use of his first name startled them both. I would be honored. He nodded, suddenly unsure what to do with his hands, his words, the warmth spreading through his chest. I'll come for you Thursday morning. At the door, he paused. She touched his arm light. Brief. The first time in 2 years. Thank you, she said. This means more than you know. He carried the ghost of her touch all the way home. Sarah's kitchen Roberta arrived before dawn. Michael had barely finished the morning chores when her wagon appeared on the road earlier than expected, loaded with supplies he hadn't asked for. You said I could help prepare, she called as she climbed down. I took you at your word. The children burst from the cabin in their nightclothes, heedless of the cold. Aunt Roberta. Thanksgiving doesn't cook itself. She knelt to embrace them both. Now inside, both of you, before you catch your death. The cabin transformed that morning. Roberta moved through Sarah's kitchen like she had never left it because Michael realized. She had spent countless hours here in the years before Sarah died. She knew where the good flour was kept, which pot worked best for gravy, how to coax the temperamental oven into cooperation. She wore Sarah's apron, not as a costume or a memorial, but naturally, easily, as if it had always belonged to her too. Michael tried to help and mostly stayed out of the way. He peeled potatoes. He kept the children occupied. He watched Roberta work and felt something loosening in his chest, a knot he hadn't known was there. By afternoon, the cabin smelled of roasting turkey, baking bread, cinnamon and cloves. The children napped by the fire, exhausted from excitement. The adults sat at the kitchen table, sharing coffee and quiet words. "I miss her most in this room," Roberta said. "All those hours we spent here, talking about everything and nothing. She had a way of making ordinary moments feel sacred." She did. Michael wrapped his hands around his cup. "I've been so focused on surviving that I forgot to notice who was keeping me afloat." Roberta looked at him, really looked, without the careful distance she usually maintained. "You lost your wife. Michael. No one expected you to notice anything else. But I should have." He set down his cup. 2 years you've been coming here. 2 years of bringing supplies, helping with the children, fixing what I neglected. And I never once asked about your life, your needs. I didn't come for thanks. Why did you come? The question hung between them. Roberta's gaze dropped to her hands. "Sarah was my only family," she said finally. "When she died, I didn't just lose my best friend. I lost my home in the world." Michael felt the weight of her words settle into him. "Coming here," she continued. "Being with the children, helping you. It was the only way I knew to stay close to her. To feel like I still belonged somewhere." "You do belong." The words came before he could stop them. "Here. With us." Their eyes met. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Roberta stood suddenly, smoothing her apron. "The children will wake soon. I should check the turkey." Michael let her go. Let the moment pass. But something had shifted, something fragile and new, breathing between them. When the children woke, the house filled with noise and motion again. They set the table together, all 4 of them working in easy harmony. For the first time in 2 years, the cabin felt like home. The widow's whisper, the knock came during dinner. They had just sat down, Michael at the head, Roberta across from him, children on either side. Thomas was reaching for a biscuit when the sound cut through the warmth. Michael rose, frowning. Visitors on Thanksgiving were rare. Martha Hale stood on the porch, pie in hand, smile in place. She was a widow herself, 10 years gone, with opinions on everything and a memory for gossip that stretched back decades. "Michael, I saw smoke from your chimney and thought I'd bring a pie. Apple from my own—" She stopped, looking past him. "Oh, you have company. Mrs. Hale." He stepped back reluctantly. "Won't you come in?" She entered like a woman surveying territory. Her eyes swept the table, Roberta and Sarah's chair, the children's bright faces. The feast spread between them. "Miss Ellison, what a surprise!" "Mrs. Hale." Roberta's voice was careful. "Happy Thanksgiving. Indeed, a family gathering. I see." Martha set her pie on the sideboard with deliberate precision. "Though I confess I didn't realize Miss Ellison was family." The temperature in the room dropped. Michael saw Thomas's smile fade, saw Emma look between the adults with confusion. "Miss Ellison has been a great help to us," Michael said. "We invited her to share the holiday." "How generous." Martha turned to him, her voice dropping to a concerned murmur. "Michael, might I have a word, privately?" The children watched, sensing tension they couldn't name. Roberta sat very still, in the corner by the window. Martha delivered her message with the efficiency of a woman practiced in such conversations. Folks in town are starting to talk. Michael, a single man, an unmarried woman visiting every week. You must see how it looks. She helps with the children. Nothing more. I don't doubt your intentions. Martha's eyes said otherwise. But appearances matter, for Sarah's memory. If nothing else, she patted his arm. I'm only telling you because I care. The children need stability, not scandal. When Michael returned to the table, the warmth had drained from the room. Roberta stood, gathering her shawl. I should go. I've just remembered a headache. I'm so sorry. No, you promised to stay for pie? Another time, sweetheart. Roberta bent to kiss the children's foreheads, avoiding Michael's eyes. Thank you for a lovely meal. Roberta. Michael started. Happy Thanksgiving, Mr. Hartwell. The formal name cut like a blade. She was gone before he could find words to stop her. Emma cried. Thomas pushed away his plate. Martha made excuses about returning to her own meal and disappeared with satisfaction poorly concealed. Michael stood in the doorway. Watching Roberta's wagon diminish into the dusk, he should call out, should follow, should do something. But the old paralysis held him. The fear of what others might think, might say, the weight of Sarah's memory invoked as a weapon. He let her go. That night, after the children were in bed, Michael sat alone by the dying fire. The feast lay half-eaten on the table. The cabin, so warm that afternoon, had turned cold. He had done nothing wrong and done nothing right. The silence accused him with every popping ember. What Sarah left behind the fire had burned to embers when Michael finally moved. He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Roberta's face, the careful blankness she'd worn while Martha spoke, the slight trembling of her hands as she gathered her things. She hadn't been surprised. This wasn't the first time someone had whispered warnings, cast aspersions, questioned her presence in his life. She had simply accepted it, as if shame were her due. Michael rose and paced the dark cabin. His thoughts churned without direction. He passed the shelf where Sarah kept her Bible-worn leather, gilt-edged pages, her most treasured possession. On impulse, he took it down. It fell open to a familiar page, their wedding date, recorded in Sarah's careful hand. The margins were filled with her writing, prayers, observations, little notes to herself and to God. And there, tucked between the pages, a folded paper he had never seen. His hands trembled as he opened it. My dearest Michael, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I wish I had more time to watch our children grow. Time to grow old beside you. Time to tell you everything in my heart. But if God has other plans, then let me say this now. Do not mourn forever. You were not made for loneliness, and the children need more than a father. They need a home alive with love. Roberta knows my heart. She has known it since we were girls, and I trust her more than anyone in this world. She has promised to watch over you, but Michael, that is not all I asked of her. Let her show you her heart. Let her love you, and let yourself love again. This is not betrayal. This is my blessing, freely given. Live, my darling. Love again. Forever yours. Sarah Michael read the letter twice. 3 times. The words blurred through tears. Let Roberta love you. The last words Sarah had spoken to him. He had heard them through a fog of grief and exhaustion, had interpreted them as a request for friendship, for practical help. But Sarah had meant more. She had always meant more. He thought of Roberta, alone in her small room, pressing flowers from Sarah's garden because they were all she had left. He thought of 2 years of faithful service, asking nothing in return. He thought of the touch on his arm, the look in her eyes when he'd asked her to Thanksgiving. She had been waiting for him to heal, waiting for him to see. and he had let her leave tonight without a word. Michael folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the Bible. Then he moved to the window, looking toward town. The night was cold and dark. Any reasonable man would wait until morning, but Michael had been reasonable for 2 years. He had been careful, proper, safe, and all it had gotten him was a life half-lived and a woman driving home alone to an empty room. He grabbed his coat and headed for the door. Some truths couldn't survive another night. The ride before dawn. Michael woke the children in darkness. "Papa." Thomas rubbed his eyes. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." Michael helped Emma into her coat. "We're going to town." "Now," Emma yawned. "But it's still night. Almost morning." He lifted her onto his hip. "We're going to bring Aunt Roberta home." Thomas came fully awake at that. "Home? You mean—" "I mean home. Where she belongs." Michael met his son's eyes. "I should have said so a long time ago." The ride to town passed in cold silence and warm anticipation. Emma fell asleep against Michael's shoulder. Thomas sat straight beside him, watching the horizon where the first gray light of dawn was beginning to show. "Papa." Thomas spoke without turning his head. "Yes. Mama would be happy about this. I know she would." Michael's throat tightened. "I know she would too." The boarding house was dark when they arrived. Mrs. Crawford answered the door in her nightcap, confusion and alarm competing on her face. "Mr. Hartwell, it's not yet 6 o'clock. I need to see Miss Ellison. Please." Something in his voice stopped her protest. She stepped aside and pointed up the stairs. Michael climbed alone, children waiting in the parlor below. His boots sounded too loud on the wooden steps. His heart beat louder still. He knocked. A long pause. Then movement. A lamp being lit, and Roberta opened the door. She wore a simple nightdress, a shawl clutched around her shoulders. Her hair fell loose, her face unguarded in a way he had never seen. She had been crying, he could tell by the redness around her eyes. Michael. His name was a question and an answer at once. "What's happened?" "Nothing's happened." He stepped closer. "Everything's happened." She didn't retreat, though the space between them could barely hold a breath. "I found Sarah's letter last night, the one she left in her Bible." Roberta's hand went to her heart. "She said she would. I didn't know when. She told me to let you love me." "She told me 2 years ago, and I didn't understand. I thought she meant as a friend." Roberta's voice was barely a whisper. I know that's what you thought. But that's not what she meant. And I've wasted 2 years because I was blind and afraid and—" She pressed her fingers to his lips. "Stop!" "Roberta. Sarah made me promise something too." Her eyes glistened in the lamplight. She said, "When he's ready, don't let him be afraid." She knew you would be. She knew it might take time. It took too long. "No." Roberta shook her head. "It took exactly as long as it needed to." Michael took her hands in his. They were cold, trembling, but they didn't pull away. "I'm healed, Roberta. I'm healed, and I'm here, and I'm asking you, will you come home with us? Not as a visitor, not as a friend, as family." The tears came then, streaming down her cheeks. But she was smiling. "The children are downstairs, waiting. Thomas told me Mama would be happy." His voice broke. "I believe he's right." Roberta kissed him. It was soft, gentle, a beginning rather than a culmination. When she pulled back, her smile had widened. "Then take me home. Michael Hartwell." They descended the stairs together. Emma, awake now, launched herself at Roberta's legs. Thomas stood with solemn dignity, then grinned like the child he still was. "Let's go home," Michael said. They climbed into the wagon as the sun broke over the hills, turning the frost to gold. The table set for 5. The cabin glowed with firelight. They had returned to find the abandoned feast still on the table, a reminder of interrupted joy. But now, with all 4 of them working together, the remnants became a new beginning. Emma swept crumbs while Thomas stacked dishes. Roberta warmed what could be salvaged turkey, bread, the last of the vegetables. Michael rebuilt the fire until it roared with life. By evening, the table was reset. Not the careful arrangement of yesterday, but something better. Plates clustered close, elbows nearly touching. No one sitting alone at either end. 5 places. No empty chairs. "Can I say grace, Papa?" Thomas asked. "Go ahead, son." They bowed their heads. Thomas's voice, still high with youth, filled the cabin. "Thank you, God, for the food. Thank you for our home. Thank you for bringing Aunt Roberta." He paused, choosing his words. "Thank you for bringing Aunt Roberta to stay forever. Amen. Amen," they echoed. Emma climbed onto Roberta's lap without asking, a gesture so natural it might have happened 1,000 times before. Roberta held her close, meeting Michael's eyes across the table. "Forever is a long time," she said softly. "Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything." The meal was imperfect turkey slightly dry, bread a bit stale, vegetables overcooked from reheating. No one cared. They talked and laughed and told stories. Thomas recounted the morning's adventure with elaborate detail. Emma demanded to know when Roberta's things would arrive, which room would be hers, whether she could call her Mama. The last question silenced the table. Roberta looked to Michael, uncertain. "That's up to Aunt Roberta," he said. "And there's no hurry. We have time. All the time in the world," Roberta agreed, stroking Emma's hair. "But for now, Aunt suits me just fine." After supper, after dishes and stories and bedtime prayers, Michael and Roberta walked out into the night. The frost lay thick on the grass, glittering under a half-moon. Their breath misted in the cold. Roberta pulled her shawl tight, but she didn't retreat inside. They stopped at Sarah's grave. The headstone looked different in moonlight, less like an ending, more like a marker on a journey. Michael took Roberta's hand and placed it gently on the cold stone. "Thank you," he whispered to Sarah, to Roberta, to the strange and tender mercy that had finally opened his eyes.